Let's talk about an important type of liability that's very applicable in the construction industry, and that is vicarious liability. As you guys are aware, the construction industry has a lot of subcontracting involved in it. If I am a builder and I get a project, then I am very likely to subcontract the electrical works. I'm very likely to subcontract the plumbing works and the concreting works as well, etc. So subcontracting is a major element that's involved in construction, and that's why there's all sorts of liabilities that can arise due to subcontracting. Now, an important thing that we have to understand is that if you can establish an employer and an employee relationship, so an employer-employee relationship, then in this case, the employer would be held vicariously liable for any tort that's committed by their employees. And that's usually how the law is. However, when you've got subcontractors, these are usually not classified as an employer-employee relationship, well, but they would be deemed more of an independent contractor. And that's when there would be issues around this concept of vicarious liability. Now, a head contractor would be liable to the developer under contract law for any works that are conducted or carried out by its subcontractors that are not to a reasonable level and standards. So if there's any negligence in the works that's carried out by the subcontractors involved, then the head contractor in this case would be held liable to the developer under contract law. So there is sort of vicarious liability under contract law. However, this is not the case under tort law. So the head contractor over here wouldn't be held liable for the negligence of its subcontractors in tort law. As I said, in tort law, in order for the vicarious liability to hold, you have to establish an employer-employee relationship. And the way this is done is by looking through several elements. Now, the first element is wages. Wages paid by the employer to the employee. If the answer is yes, then it's most likely that there is an employer-employee relationship. Another element the court looks at is the tools that are supplied by the employer. So these specific tools, do they belong to the employer, and are they just supplied to the employee to utilize when they're working, and they have to return back to the employer? And if the answer is yes, then an employer-employee relationship is very likely to exist. Another element is the superannuation contributions aspect. So if the employer is contributing to the superannuation of the employee, then an employer-employee relationship exists. Another, again, element is a uniform. If there is a uniform that's supplied by the employer, then the employer-employee relationship would be found to exist. And these elements have all been covered in this Sweeney and Boylan case, which is an Australian case. Having said that, vicarious liability doesn't hold in the case that you have a head contractor, a subcontractor. That doesn't mean that the head contractor will not be liable for anything that's committed by the subcontractors. There will still be a liability, so the head contractor will still be held to be liable in tort for several things. Now, point number one is that the head contractor always owes a duty of care to inspect installation of works that are carried out by its subcontractors. So there is this duty of care, and if they fail to perform that duty of care, then they would be found to be liable for their negligence in performing that aspect. The other point is that the head contractor has a duty to select competent subcontractors. So I can't just, as a head contractor, I can't get a project and then select whatever subcontractors randomly without assessing their competence. So I've got to select their competence. I've got to select these subcontractors based on their competence. And if they're not competent, then I can be found to have not undertaken my duty in terms of selecting competent subcontractors, and hence I'll be found to be liable in tort by the court. Now, these aspects that I just discussed were highlighted in this very important case, in the New South Wales case, W. Bay Jones and Richardson.